My name is David Ducart. It's my honor today to interview a World War II veteran, John H. Leahr. We're at the Pleasant Ridge Branch Library, and it's Wednesday, October 25th, 2006. Mr. Leahr, thank you so much for agreeing to meet with me this morning. Can you tell me a little bit about where you grew up and just your general background?
Well, I was born in Cincinnati, Ohio here, and as a young man I lived in Walnut Hills for a short period of time, and then we moved to Avondale on Clinton Springs. That's where my great-grandfather well, he had been a slave, and he was fought in the Civil War, and after the war he came to Cincinnati and he bought a few acres of land on Clinton Springs, which was a very rural area at the time, and built a home, and then some of the family had 3 or 4 houses up in there in the area, and we had a few other, sold a few lots, and so there was a little community there of about seven houses, and it was a little dark black community in an almost Avondale at that time, and it was a very largely Jewish community, and the people, the Negroes who lived on Clinton Springs, were mainly domestics or chauffeurs and did work for the people in the community. So we were on Clinton Springs, which was down at the lower end of it, and the northern end was in the Jewish community, and there was a little space between there. It was kind of woodsy area at the time. In fact, it wasn't very well built up at that time. So I was born there, one of 10 children. My mother and father had 10 children in the family. I was the 3rd oldest, and there were 5 girls and 5 boys. We lost one young boy after a year old or something, so that left 9 of us. And so we had my dad always had a job. We went through the Depression and all the hard times, but my dad always had a job, and we were able to manage to survive. We survived through the Depression, and it wasn't easy all the time, I'll say that, because trying to feed a family of 10, and it didn't make, I think he'd make about $25 a week at that time, something like that, and still able to have an automobile. And one of the advantages was that we had a home that had been built on some of my mother's property and stuff in the home, so there wasn't any rent to pay and stuff, so I guess that helped out a lot. So anyway, that's the problem. We came up there, and the schools in Cincinnati at that time were segregated almost 100%. But in North Avondale at that time, we were just a small community, and we were very isolated from regular Avondale School, which was up on Reading Road and quite a ways from there, but they had a little school, North Avondale, and so they decided just to integrate that school, so the few blacks that were down in that community attended North Avondale School for the first few years of our life. It was up to the 5th grade, and then after that, when we'd move out, we'd usually go to another school, sometimes integrated, segregated schools. So we lived there, and then after I got about 10, we moved. Our next move was out to Madisonville, and that was, I left Avondale, and we moved to Madisonville. I went to Withrow High School. I had finished the 8th grade at Douglas School. I went to 5th grade up at North Avondale, and then when I got to 6th grade, I went to Douglas School, which is a segregated school in Walnut Hills. And so I finished there through the 8th grade, and then we moved to Madisonville. In 9th grade, I went to Withrow High School, and I graduated from Withrow High School in 1938. And after graduating from high school, I wanted to go to college, but we didn't have any money or anything, so I stayed out of school for a year, going to work in the Depression era, and there was no job, so I stayed out a year, didn't have any money at the end of the year. My dad scraped together $50, gave me $50, and took me up to Wilberforce University at Xenia, Ohio, and so I went in with this $50 and told the bursar I wanted to go to college, and he looked at me and sort of smiled, and I said, how much money? You know, I told him I had $50. He looked at me and smiled, but they gave me a job, paid me a room and board, and so I finished the whole year there. At the end of the year, finished, and I had good grades and everything, but I had a little problem toward the end of the year. I was waiting tables. I was a waiter at a dining hall, and had a little dispute with one of the basketball players, and he jumped up from the table and accosted me, but the woman who was in charge of that didn't realize what had happened. Anyway, we got into a little fight and a skirmish, and I think I got the better of it. I knocked him over on the table. So the guys came and held, some of the other waiters came to break it up, and they held my hands, and when they held my arms, this guy came up and hit me in the eye, and I broke loose and hit him again a couple of times. So I didn't have a job. When I went back to school the next year, the lady who was in charge told me, I can't have a waiter around who beats up on the other customers. So I was out of a job. I understand later that I could have gone back and talked. I was, well, they had a play, and I was interested in dramatics at Wilberforce at that time. We had a play that was drawn up by Langston Hughes. It was called Don't You Want to Be Free? And I tried out for the part, and I was a leading actor in that play. And we traveled around. I guess we must have given that play about 5 or 6 times. As we came to Cincinnati, we gave Cincinnati, Dayton, Columbus, and Cleveland, and I think we went to Chicago too. And Langston Hughes was present at a couple of those performances. So I had a chance to meet him, and it was an experience that I probably never would have gotten anyplace else. But I left there, and I came to the University of Cincinnati, and there's limited courses and things that you could take there. They wanted to keep you in education. You couldn't go, there was no co-oping or anything in any of the colleges at UC. So I went, and they said, well, we'll put you in elementary education, and I wasn't really interested in it, and after about 6 months, and I went into one of the classes. They had a singing class where there was an elderly woman who was teaching it, and she used to come in every time. She'd come in about 4 to 6. We'd have to sit there, and she came in and started loo-loo-loo-loo, and she loo-loo-looed, and I got up and left the class and never came back. So I quit school, and I went to work Wright Aeronautical because a war was coming on, and so I worked at Wright Aeronautical for a year or something like that, and then the war broke out, and I enlisted. Well, I was always interested in aviation, and about that time there had been a lot of pressure put on the military to start a flying program for blacks because the military was 100% segregated, and they said there would never be any black pilots because the Army Air Corps was not going to have any. But suit was brought against the military, and they finally said, well, what we'll do, we'll start a program for the blacks. We know that they don't have the intelligence or the ability to maintain and fly aircraft, and it's going to be 100% segregated. So they'll all flunk out, and we can just say we gave them a chance and they didn't make it. So that was the way the program was started. And so they made it rough as they could. We went into this program at Tuskegee. They started the program at Tuskegee Institute. They had a flying field down there at Tuskegee where they had civilian pilot training. That program had started in 1939, and Tuskegee Institute became a part of that, and so they had a lot of young black flyers there who had finished the civilian pilot training program, and some of them were instructors. So when they started the program, they chose Tuskegee as this point where they would have this base. So they built a base about 10 miles from Tuskegee that they started the primary flying. Well, the flying for Air Corps flying to get a pilot's license. They had a primary training program, then you went, that was given usually at under civilian instructors and under programs that, like at Tuskegee Institute. So we stayed at the campus on there, we went to flying. They had their little flying school there, and they had black instructors. So we went through our primary training at Tuskegee Institute. When we finished that, we moved to they had the Tuskegee Army Airfield that was built about 10 miles away. We moved out to the airfield and took our basic training and our advanced training. And when we finished advanced training, and they got a few more people through that program than the military was surprised. We had a young white colonel who finally got in charge of that program, Noel Parrish. He was a major, I think, or something like that when he took over, but he saw what was going on. The old idea was to wash it out, and when he saw it, he said, we saw all these young guys trying, fighting, and doing their darndest to try to get through that program. He felt they deserved a chance, he said, so he stuck his neck out and tried to see that the young men would finish the program and would be given a chance in combat to prove whether or not they were worthy of the program. So Colonel Parrish, I think we all say that he was responsible for the program being continued. So we got enough people through the program. We went overseas, did a real great job. We're highly honored, and well, I think one of the greatest tributes has said that we flew over 1,500 escort missions in the 15th Air Force, escorting bombers, and we never lost a bomber to enemy fighters. We're the only group in the Air Force that ever did that. So that was an accomplishment, and that led eventually to the integration of the Air Force and the military, the Air Force and then the military. So we feel that the Tuskegee Airmen were the start of the big civil rights movement. That was started back in 1960. 48 is when they integrated the military, and that was the start of the civil rights movement. So that was the early part of my life, and after I went through the military, I flew 132 combat missions, and became a flight instructor after I finished 132 combat missions. I was one of the last fellows to join in the 332nd Fighter Group. That was a fighter group that was started at Tuskegee. They had the 99th Fighter Squadron was the first group that was finished training. They had about 40 pilots. They didn't know what to do with them, so the whole program was started with one fighter squadron, the 99th Fighter Squadron. So when they got that squadron completed, they filled it up. They just kept them around for a year, didn't know what to do with them. Nobody wanted them. No white organizations wanted them, but they finally sent them overseas, and they were sent over with a white organization, and the commander of that organization didn't want them and gave them a base about 10 miles a few miles from the regular base where the whites were. He kept them segregated, and they gave some bad reports on them and a lot of stuff, but they finally were transferred to somebody else, and they did real well. I think they really proved themselves at Anzio. When the Anzio came about, when the Americans were invading Italy and came into Anzio, they were being pushed back into the sea. The German Air Force was dive bombing and strafing them and pushing them back into the sea, and they put the 99th up there to defend it. And so the 99th went in there, and in about 5 or 6 days or a week, something like that, I think they destroyed somewhere around 17 or 18 enemy aircraft and damaged quite a few others, and they saved Anzio. And after that, Ike Eisenhower came all the way from England to congratulate them. And so they were kind of given, they might say they were part of the military again, but they were still completely segregated. And about that time, they decided I was training at Tuskegee at that time, and so in January of 44, I graduated. I started my training program at Tuskegee in November of 42, and I completed it in July of 43. And went to Selfridge Field and trained, and then in January of 44, sent overseas. And I guess we started in combat in February or March of 44, and then between March and December 44, I flew 132 combat missions, and I was one of the last guys to join the squadron, and the first guy in my squadron to complete a tour of combat, because nobody else flew as much as I did. They flew my tail off, and I was tired and worn out, I'll tell you, and I was glad to get back. And they sent me back to the States, and I became a flight instructor at Tuskegee. And I was instructing first an instrument instructor, and then later they made me a multi-engine instructor because we were training a group of bomber pilots to set up a bomber group to go overseas into the Pacific. And just before the war ended, we had trained 4 squadrons of bomber pilots and had 4 squadrons of bombers all ready to go into combat when the war ended. They even had their planes out on the Pacific coast waiting for them, B-25s, when the war ended, so that dissolved that, and that was about the end of it. Now, some of the people went on, stayed in the military. I had no desire. I had a lot of very, very bad experiences while I was in there. I was a northern boy, and I'd never been any further south than Lexington, Kentucky in my life, and when I was 20-some years old. And when I got down south, I guess they didn't give me the right instructions. All I had when we got down south, one of the commanding officers, they had a white captain come in and talk to us. We had black men from all over the country came down there, and there were 60 of us in my class. And he said, I know you boys are from the north all over the country. He was a white captain from the south. And he said, but I want you to understand one thing. You came down here to fly airplanes, not to fly airplanes. You didn't come down here to change any social customs or to upset any of our ideas and things that we do down here. And if you do, you get in any trouble in any way whatsoever, you're on your own. The military isn't going to help you. The United States Army and government isn't going to help you. And if you get in any trouble, just know you're on your own. And that's it.
Did you understand what he was trying to tell you? I mean,
not thoroughly, because I'll tell you what I did. Not too long after that, there's several things happened, but one day there were some officers in the car. We were driving someplace. It was nighttime, and he looked like a 4-double-F. He's the sorriest looking policeman I'd ever seen, and just some little raggedy car stopped us, and where are you niggers going, he says. And I said, without thinking, we're not niggers, we're officers in the United States Army Air Corps. And when I said that, that guy just got livid. He started trembling and shaking. He pulled his pistol out. He put his gun cocked it, put it to my temple, and said, nigger, say one more word and I'll blow your GD brains out. And he was just shaking his hand, shaking. Say something, say it. Just kept trying to encourage me to say something. He would have killed me in a minute. It would have been, he just wanted to kill me so bad. And that really hit me, let me know that this was right after I'd been overseas. The first thing, I'd been overseas, but I'd come back because I'd trained back from that time. But before that, I had another incident. I had several incidents down there that let me know. One time I was in Memphis, Tennessee, after I'd come back from overseas. I had a goiter or something. They told me, well, they said, if you want to have it, you can have an operation. I said, Tuskegee. They said, you have an operation and cure it, and they'll take care of you. You never have to worry about it, or else we can put you on medication. You'll be on medication for the rest of your life. Well, I thought, if I can get out of this service and, without all this stuff and for the rest of my life, I'll do that. So I said, well, let me go to Memphis and get this operation. So we went to Memphis, and while we were up at Memphis, I met 3 other black officers who were in the hospital. This was Kennedy General Hospital. And at Kennedy General Hospital, there were 3 black officers. I don't remember what the operations were. I don't even remember their names. I remembered one of them's name. I put some of the names down in a little booklet or something. And we went out. They told me, when you get well enough, we'll go out and take you in town. We met a pharmacist and somebody, and they were nice people treating the veterans, who were in the hospital nice. And so I went with them after I got well enough to get out of the hospital. We went downtown. We were waiting for a bus to take us over to this pharmacy where this pharmacist was, and you'd go from the pharmacy to his home, and he'd give him dinner and take us back to the hospital. And while we were waiting for the bus, it's right down the heart of Memphis, I don't know what you'd call him, but he was a great big bruiser, rough-looking thug, I would call him, and I had a couple of friends with him, and he walked up to us, saw us down there. We were all in uniform, dress uniform. I had my ribbons on, decorations overseas and everything. He said, my God, he said, look at here, nigger officers. He said, I've killed a lot of niggers. I've never killed a nigger officer, and I'm going to kill you niggers. Well, of course, we thought, no, this is just something. It said, you know, it can't be. He doesn't mean what he's saying. So we ignored him. He knocked us around, started beating us around, hit us and knocked us up against the buildings. And I thought, this guy must be serious or something. And then pretty soon 2 white officers came up, and I said, thank God. And one of them got out and came over to the group and asked us, what's going on here? He said, oh, nothing, officer. He said, I've killed a lot of niggers, but I never killed any nigger officers, and I'm going to kill these niggers. Policeman turned around and got in his car, and they drove away. I was back from overseas. Can you imagine how I felt? I hear people say, whenever I tell this story, people say, oh. I said, well, how do you think I felt? I'm back from overseas. I've been over fighting for my country, and I come back here, and there's a great big crowd gathered, and I'm waiting for somebody in this crowd to come forward and say, stop this. And they were all waiting to see the lynching. And pretty soon, thankfully, some little sailor came by. It had his wife and a little girl with him, and he asked what's going on, and the guy told him the story, and he said, well, what did they do to you? He said, they didn't do nothing to me. I just don't like niggers. He said, well, I don't like them either, but when they don't bother me, I don't bother them. He said, where are you all going? Well, about that time, a bus drove up, and you know where we lived, going into that bus. He put us on the bus. We got on the bus. We got away from there and got back to the base. I was supposed to stay at the base for another 20 or 30 days or something, and then be discharged. But when I got back to the base, I told them at the base I wouldn't stay in this town another minute longer than I had to. I called Tuskegee, and I told them, I said, how soon can you have an airplane up here for me? I got to get out of here. And by this time, our black guys were coming back from overseas, and they were taking over the offices, and the operations officer was a classmate of mine, Leahr. And so I said, Lee, how soon can you have a plane up here? I said, I almost got lynched today. He said, you have one up there first thing in the morning. I said, it'd be about 7 o'clock. I said, I'll be out to the airport. So next morning, I signed myself out of the hospital, went out to the airport, flew back to Tuskegee, and I stayed almost on that base until I was discharged from service because I was afraid to leave the base almost. So I was more afraid in the United States than I had ever been overseas fighting Germans, and I was treated much nicer overseas in every place than I'd ever been in the United States. So I did not have a lot of love for America, I'll tell you. For the military, I had thought I would seek a career in the military, and I'd already signed up that I wanted to be a regular military officer because I wanted to fly. But then I thought, well, with my experience, I was a single multi-engine pilot, an instrument instructor, and I said I had all the qualifications that I should be a good airline pilot. So I said, I'll get out and go fly with the airlines. So when I got out, I found out that no airlines would hire a black pilot. So there were no black pilots in the airlines, and I was out of the service in about 1945, or 46 when I got out of the service, and the airlines didn't hire a black pilot until the 1960s. So discrimination was hitting all the way around. So I didn't have a pleasant experience. My whole life was not a pleasant thing to be an American. And I didn't have a whole lot of respect for America because I did not feel that I was being treated as a veteran. I was willing to risk my life, and when I give talks, I tell people that I had read as a young man Theodore Roosevelt, one of his quotes someplace, that any man who is willing to give his life in defense of his country is entitled to every benefit of that country. No man should ask for more, and no man should receive less. And I came back and I was getting my tail kicked everywhere I turned. I came back to Cincinnati. I couldn't get a job in Cincinnati. No place. Nobody ever knew when the war ended, and no type of publication was there ever any mention made that there were black pilots flying in World War II. It wasn't until 1972 when one of our pilots who had stayed in the military, had been retired, and his daughter was in college in Pennsylvania someplace, I think, and she was in a class, and a professor said that there were no black pilots in World War II. Well, this man was a quite decorated man. He was a lieutenant colonel. He retired as a colonel, and he had quite a record. He sent all of his wife, daughter called him and said, "This is what this professor had said." And he sent all his records and stuff to her so that she could show it to this professor. She showed them to him. She said he looked at him and said, very interesting, and he never corrected himself, never ever told the class that he was wrong and that there were black pilots. So then this guy got together and decided we should tell our own story because the government, no publication, no book that was published after World War II ever had anything in it about that. There were bookshelves in the library. I understand you could go through old shelves on the Air Corps, and nowhere in any of those books was there any mention made about black pilots having flown in World War II. So we said, we'll tell our own story. So we met in Detroit, and we got the proof, and we said that our purpose would be, we said we'll form a national organization. Our purpose would be to tell our story and to try to encourage young people to get into careers in aviation and to encourage them to get, educations and all these sort of things. And we would sponsor some of them, get programs started to help young people to get careers in aviation. So we started our program, and that's when we called ourselves the Tuskegee Airmen. And since that time, we had about, we had 40-some chapters in the United States, and one in Japan and one in Germany. And I think that I guess that was about it. We had that, but we did, and then it wasn't until 1995 when HBO came out with this movie, The Tuskegee Airmen, that the country got really a lot of publicity about the Tuskegee Airmen and knew that we existed, and then we became known. And we're, sort of popular. The name was popular again, but nobody knew anything about us from 1945 until after 1972. So that's about the story as I can tell you most of my end of it, what I saw.
Well, although the recognition came late, it must be gratifying now to feel that your story is in fact, you've been able to tell your story and receive some of the recognition that you were denied earlier, and the respect.
But we don't have the money that we should have had. See, I look around and I see fellas who came out and went in to be airline pilots. They're living in luxury. They're living they might Indian Hill or someplace. I'm living in here down, and I did not have the funds, although I did go into investments. I became a stockbroker, and I'm not starving, but I could have been a whole lot better off financially, and I've been given the opportunities that I deserve because I'd earned them.
Certainly. Can I have a few questions.
Sure.
I also want to correct one thing, an apology to our camera operator. Sherry Denyon is our camera operator, and I failed to mention that at the beginning. I want to go back much earlier to your childhood. Do you think you were an outstanding student?
I was a good student.
And was education emphasized in your house?
Yes.
Or was it just something that...
No, my folks believed in education, but there was not much of an opportunity. My dad didn't have any money. We didn't have any. College was expensive in those days. It was during the Depression, you know, and there wasn't anything. I was the first one in my, no, I think my sister was the first one. I have a younger sister. She went up to Wilberforce, and I think she graduated while I was still in service, because I didn't graduate from, I came back and went to UC, and I graduated from UC in 1946, or 47, something there. And so there were only 2 of us out of the 10 of us that really graduated from college. Some of the others had all attended courses and got some education, but education was pushed for in the family, and I guess we didn't get as many of us through as would like to have.
Growing up in Cincinnati, did you feel that you were in a hostile environment?
Yes, I never really felt that it was, well, it wasn't real hostile, but it was not a pleasant. You know, we were segregated when we lived in Avondale. We had a little black community, and if we wanted to go to a show or something, we had to go all the way to Walnut Hills because there was a feature theater. We couldn't go to the theaters. We weren't welcome in public parks. You couldn't go swimming. There were no public parks. You couldn't go to the public parks and go swimming. There was none of them close to us in Avondale anyway. And so if I wanted to swim, I'd have to go all the way to Walnut Hills, and there was this pool over at Douglas School. They had a summer pool, and that was the only pool around that was public that you could go to, black kids could go to. So things were not real nice in Cincinnati, and I never forget when I went to high school. Well, they had swimming, and high school, they wouldn't let the black kids swim. You had to wait until the last bell on Friday, and they would drain the pool and refill it, and the white kids would swim till the last bell on Friday. They'd let the black kids go in, and they'd drain the pool. Well, that's a slap in the face. You know, that I wouldn't go swimming. I didn't learn to swim because I wouldn't go in the pool. I didn't go in there. It was such a degrading thing that I wouldn't do it. I guess I was sort of had a chip on my shoulder all my life, and racism and hatred. I didn't like it, and I'd fight it all the way, any way I could and wherever I could, and I've done it all my life. I've never succumbed to racism. I've had jobs. I've left jobs. I worked for, I don't know whether I should mention companies' names, but I did work for Cincinnati Gas and Electric for about 10 years. I had a pretty nice job. I was in charge of finance, payroll for a group, but there was a lot of racism that was hitting around the edges, and I just could not stand racism and couldn't tolerate it, and my blood pressure would go up. I was going to the doctor down there at the Gas and Electric, wanted to check my pressure 3 or 4 times a week, and I thought, hell, I'm not going to lose my health for a job. If I kept to have a job where I can't work and work in comfort, the heck with the job, I'll leave it. So I quit. I resigned. I was resigning, and then I happened to remember I was vested in the pension plan, so I retired in 9 years. And it's been a pretty good retirement because from there I've gotten medical attention, and I've got over $100,000 in pension plan over the last 27 years. So it wasn't good, but it was better than just walking away from the job.
Okay. Getting back into your military service, I can't recall, did you enlist or were you?
Yeah, I enlisted. We had to enlist in the Air Corps. They didn't draft you for the Army, for the Air Corps. You had to enlist in the Air Corps. But we had selective service, and when they called me in for a physical, they told me I could fail it because I had a bad injury to my leg, my right leg, and I'd almost lost this leg in an accident, and I had no nerves and muscles and stuff were messed up in it, and I couldn't balance on that. One of the tests they had, you had to balance, hold your arms out in front of you, and balance on the one knee, and I'd fall flat on my face. And when I told this man who was examining me that day, he said, "You're 4F?" I said, "No." I said, "I can't be 4F because I'm going to fly airplanes." He says, "You'll never fly airplanes." He says, "So you might as well forget that." He says, your leg will not let you go. And I said, "Well, you make me 1A because I'm going to fly airplanes." He says, "Well, if you want to be 1A, I'll make you 1A, but you'll never fly airplanes." And I went and enlisted in the Air Corps. And they started giving me my physical, and the man told me, well, he says, you said you can't make it with that leg. I said, "Well, listen, what do you want me to do?" I said, "What do you do with your legs in the Air Corps? You push rudder pedals." I said, "I run track, and I've been on a track team for 4 years at Withrow High School." I never told him I hadn't won a race, but I said, if I can run track and do everything anybody else can do, I can sure push rudder pedal. And the man passed me. And so I went on through, I got through it. Of course, I was instructor and everything else in the military and airplanes, so it didn't affect me as far as flying. I flew combat, 100 and some combat missions, and came back and was a flight instructor and everything, and I could have been an airline pilot had I not been black.
So did you enjoy flying from the very beginning?
Oh yeah, I enjoyed flying. I still fly. I go out, I've got a few friends. I've got a few friends. We bought an airplane first to try. Well, I didn't buy it. I got into a group, and we wanted to encourage flying among young blacks. So we got a group of about 5 or 6 of us, and we raised some money and went out to Blue Ash Airport, and one of the training programs out there. We bought a portion of an airplane, or we bought into them, because we couldn't have an airplane and we couldn't insure it if we owned it. So we bought into the flying school and told them, paid them about $12,000 to give us a right, and they had all the insurance and everything on the airplanes, and so we could send students out there and they could get the training at a reduced rate because we're paying part of it. So we have one fellow that's already an airline pilot that went through our program out there. So we have some others that are training now.
Could you describe some of your combat missions? And also tell what kind of planes you were flying?
Well, in combat, well, I flew as fighter planes. I flew the P-39, P-40, P-47, and the P-51. I flew the P-39, the P-47, and the P-51 in combat. And I guess I didn't have a whole lot of dog fights and things in combat, but I had one experience that was, I guess I didn't know what it was until 1995, but I knew in 1944, there were 4 of us in a flight that was protecting bombers. They were bombing the Hermann Goering Tank Works in Linz, Austria. And I think we were escorting some B-24s over that target that day. And there were 4 of us. Well, we used to have we'd send about 60 planes with our formations, and we'd split up in groups of 4 and circle around the bombers and keep the enemy planes away from them. And we were just coming into the target area and getting ourselves into position when there were 4 of us in this flight, and they said, the flight leader, who was Harold Sawyer, a fellow from Columbus, and we flew 100 and some combat missions together, and he hollered, "Break, break, break." That means we're under attack, and there's enemies are shooting at us. Break right, break right. So I broke right real quick, and I looked back, and I could see an airplane on my tail, and I just swung around as tight as I could. You got to get your guns pointed at them. And when I got turned around and pressed my trigger, I got one of them in my sight, and nothing happened. And I started pulling around. Well, every time I looked, there was another plane on my tail, so I was just twisting and turning every time, trying to keep these planes off of my tail, and then trying to keep them. And I tell you, I did every maneuver that I think that I ever heard of or ever thought of or ever seen done with an airplane. I was flying P-51 then. And That went on for I don't know how long, but I kept it was turning. I was slipping and sliding, and every place I would move from, if I'd move, slip up here, when I looked up where I was, I'd see a whole lot of shells bursting where there was a 20 millimeter shells were bursting just where I'd been. So I kept slipping, sliding, and did everything I could to evasive action we were taking. And that went on for I don't know how long, but it seemed like an eternity. And pretty soon my plane was getting to the point where I was turned into tight, so tight I couldn't go any further. And I was slowing up. And so what I did, I dropped some flaps so I wouldn't stall. And then when I got to the point where I didn't think I could turn anymore and everything, it was just about doomed. And I was figuring I'm going to be shot down and nothing I could do. And I said a little prayer, and I said, Lord, get me out of this mess, and I'll go to church for the rest of my life. And then I pushed we have what we call a emergency war boost, where you can push your throttle through. They have a little safety thing where you can't go beyond that, because when you go through there, you'll burn your engine up. It'll give you a boost of power, but it'll burn the engine up. And I pushed the thing through there, and my airplane went up just like an elevator. Next thing I know, I must be a couple of thousand feet up above them. And I got back to base that day, and they shot down two of our guys, Starling Penn and Alfred Carroll. They got shot down. Harold Sawyer was the guy. He got back to base, and I got back to base. But I got back way late, and they thought I'd been shot down. They thought 3 of us had been shot down, but I was able to get back. And so I didn't know until 1995. I read a book. My son had been to the Smithsonian. He brought a book back called Segregated Skies. And I was reading that book, and I read in there that they were talking about that Lens, Austria move, and they said that on that particular day, the Germans decided to, instead of spreading their Air Force out all over the sky, they'd send them at one point. And they had put their whole Air Force over the Lens, Austria area right there. So they said that they shot down 2 of the Tuskegee Airmen, and one guy was lucky, he got away. But they don't know they were lucky, because had my guns been firing, I'd have shot down 3 or 4 of them. But I realized then that I had squatted the whole daggone German Air Force. And I kept them at bay. I mean, this is something new. Just, I didn't know it until 1995 when that book came out. It was called Segregated Skies by Sandy Sattler, I think the fellow's name was. And he wrote in there that he was sent over to Germany by Smithsonian to investigate the Germans' view of how the Tuskegee Airmen operated. And that's the book that he wrote. And when he wrote that part of the book, I said, dang, I fought up the whole German Air Force and didn't even know it.
Mm-hmm. So during that particular mission, were you terrified?
You don't have time to be terrified. I'll tell you honestly, when you're doing something like that, your eyes, your thoughts, you're moving, everything you got to do, it all comes automatically. You slip, you slide, you move, you turn, you twist, you do everything. It's all, it's all built into you. I guess it's a matter of survival, and you do everything you can to keep surviving. And I don't think I had a whole lot of time to think about anything except, do I slide this way? Do I go this way? I slip, slide, and look where the planes are, and just keeps twisting, turning, and keeping, just trying to stay alive right quick through.
And what happened then when you got back to your base?
Well, when I got back to base, everybody, they had already finished fatigue and everything, and I got back to base, and they found out that, and I told them that my guns weren't fired. Well, the fellow, Harold Sawyer, came back and told him that he called me before he left, and I told him my guns weren't firing. Well, he got back, and he told them my guns weren't firing. And so they knew that my guns weren't firing, so they thought I'd been shot down too. The other fellows were shot down. I saw them both get shot down, but incidentally I saw them on fire and engines going in. And so I knew that 2 of them had been shot down, and I didn't know what happened to the other one, but Harold, he got away. And so when I got back to base, everything was all over, and I just parked my plane, and they examined it, and there was ice all over the guns. See, it was in, I think, the 25th of July, and the temperature on the ground must have been at 90, something like that, but up there at 35, 40,000 feet, it was about 40 below zero or something, and I don't know, but there was still ice on my guns, and they checked them out and found out that the armament man had, I guess he cleaned the guns or something, but he didn't reconnect the gun heater switch. It had some kind of heater switch that heated the guns, and it was disconnected, so I don't think he was around long after that. B.O. Davis, our commanding officer, was a real strict guy, and everything had to be just right, and if it wasn't, anybody messed up, you didn't mess up with him. He was, I don't know whether you knew, he was first black to graduate from West Point, you know, during this last century, and he was a real stickler, a real military man, stickler. We all had respected him highly. He was not a hail fellow well met. He was strictly a military man, and I was not a military man, so I don't know, I guess he was. Now, Chappie James, who later became the first black Air Force general, he was a classmate of mine, and Chappie and I were roommates, James and Leahr alphabetically. We were roommates for quite a few periods of our time, and I know when I was going through my records not too long ago, I was looking at my when you go overseas, see, you got to remember that this ain't quite up to snuff. When you make your will out, see, well, usually your roommates would sign it. And when I had my will made out, Chappie James signed mine. It was Second Lieutenant James, Daniel James, signed my will. And so I said, well, that's will was my first, maybe the first black general was this guy signed my will when I went overseas.
Who were your closest friends that you remember from your service days?
Oh, I said one of them was Harold Sawyer from Columbus, Ohio. We were close, pretty good friends. And then another one was Starling Penn. He was flying my wing and got shot down over Linz, Austria. And he was taken prisoner of war. And after the war, we got together. We were friends, and wife and I had a picture. I don't think I have it with me, though, of us. We went and we had a big time in New York at a nightclub, and his wife, my wife, we had pictures taken with Count Basie in New York at a nightclub where we were having a good time. And he and we used to meet each other periodically, Starling Penn and I. He was about the closest friend I had in the service then.
Were any of your other family members in the service?
I had 3 brothers, and all 4 of us were in the service at one time. One brother was in the Navy, and he was I think he was a mechanic or something on shipboard doing some type of mechanical work. Another one was in the cavalry, and that was before, and then they disbanded and put them into engineers, and the other one was in the infantry. So at one time, all 4 of us were in the service.
They all came through okay?
All came through okay, yeah.
Did they have similar bitter experiences of racism?
Well, they didn't have it as much as I did, I don't think. My brother's in the Navy. He didn't have. We didn't talk a whole lot about our experiences, and I just realized the other night I was talking with one of my sons, and I was saying something, and they're saying that people didn't talk about it. And my son, I said, "Did I ever talk with you about my experience?" He said, "No, you didn't, and I never asked you." And so we never did talk about him. He didn't know anything about my experiences because I never talked about him. It sort of was bitter, something that I didn't want to remember. I think I tried to forget it and let it go, because he said that there were times when he wanted to ask me, but he didn't feel like he should because he felt like I didn't want to talk about it. And I told him, well, he learned later, because after I started giving talks with Herb and I started talking, and he heard some of my talks then, and that's when he first really knew about it, because I never had talked about it before.
Have you been back to Europe, to any of the places where you?
No, I haven't been back. I had made, when I left Europe, I was, I don't know, I said, well, I left the service and everything, and I said, well, I've never been all over the United States. I'll see the United States, and this is Canada. I said, we've got a great nation here. So I bought a motor home, and my wife and I, we went from coast to coast across Canada, from all the way across, took 2 years and went across Canada, and then we traveled all over the United States. And so I've never been back to Europe. I do want to go back a few times I wanted to go back, but I never got an opportunity. I don't know. So I still might try to make it if I can keep going long enough.
Okay. Sherry, did you have any questions that you wanted to ask?
What lessons did you learn over there that could be applied to today's society and what's going on? Or that we're not doing that we should have learned back 50 years ago? That you took from that war, or that whole experience?
Well, I think that the Americans should have learned that this racism thing is not, it's just taboo. I mean, no really rhyme or reason behind it, but you can't get rid of it. You know, we had it so deeply ingrained in Americans that you couldn't seem to get rid of it. Even after fighting a war, coming back and fighting, and you come back and the people were still willing to kill you for no reason other than being black. And that hit me so hard that it's not easy for me to even think today. I think it impressed me, and I think it destroyed a lot of me to think that I couldn't walk down the street in America and just be safe as a citizen. And I had to be on my toes, more so in the South. I never got, like for years I wouldn't go down in the South at all. I stayed away from there until, I think from 40-something until 19, I think it was up in the 70s before I ever went back down south. And then when I went back, there'd been such a big change. I was down to a convention with some investment insurance people. We went to Florida, and I was with a white. I was the only black in the group, and they stood up for, and we go places, and people know, well, if you don't treat him, we don't go. Nobody. But that was late, see. We didn't have that until kind of late. But see, it was a situation where you could be mistreated and nobody would ever stand up for you.
And that's sad.
And so we've had some very, very rough times in the United States here.
You know, when you discuss your bitterness, but I don't see that in you. I mean, I know it's there, but when I first met you, I look at you and I see your intelligence and your sense of fun and your humanity. And so when I listen to your story about what happened to you, all I think of is the ignorance that these other people show. And so you have an intelligent man as yourself, such as yourself, and then you have the ignorance of others, and whether they be white or black. I don't know if you ever put that together, that it's just their ignorance.
I realize that we have to try to build something. That's what Herb Halpern did. You know, I showed you this picture. We met and found out that we had been, and I started talking, and we started going around. We go to schools and talk to kids, and when we get together, we hug each other and say, now, just think of what it could have been. Here we were in the first grade, third grade together. We didn't know each other until after the war. Until 95, here about 1995, and we got together and we said, hell, we could have known each other for all these years and been friends and had a nice time together. And here we are, we fought the same war. We didn't even know each other. He didn't know me until 95, I guess it was. He'd been around, and I wondered, well, where the hell he'd been all the years? But, he says, I just didn't, I wasn't thinking, it didn't hit me that I should have been,
But your path, I would look at it as your path to him. You had to go through all this and all those years until you finally did meet up with him. And look at the good you two have created now.
Yeah, well, see, I think I showed you, we've been in the Reader's Digest, the History Channel, and Tom Brokaw's show, and I know Tom Brokaw one night was talking about, what was a statement that the senator from Mississippi made or something, and it was, who was he? He said something if, he made a remark that if, I can't remember. Gee, that's what but it was a mark something that if some senator had his way back in the 50s, we wouldn't have all this racial stuff here now because all Negroes would have been eliminated or something. And that was when Tom Brokaw said, and then it showed Herb and I hugging each other, saying and showing, bringing it together and everything. So I don't know, but I just felt like it's the only thing you can do is try to make things better. I don't have too long, so I'll work and do what I can to do it while I'm alive. I don't have many more years, and they're going fast, I'll tell you. But I said, well, I'm here, I'll do the best I can and hope that it'll mean something to America because we need it. We're having an awful time in racism. We got a young group of black kids who haven't had the education. They've had split up families. They come out of groups with no education, no back, no training, so they get into drugs. They're shooting up each other, killing on the streets, killing everybody, each other, and it's just a horrible situation. But I don't know the solution. Nobody knows the solution, so what do we do? But I don't know. It's just horrible. You think about it and you say, what the heck? We've been trying to educate, get young black kids, help them, keep them in school and everything like that, but don't seem to be maybe we're not hitting the right people, but...
well, maybe they'll see you someday on this film.
Huh?
I said maybe they'll see you someday on this film and say, hey, I'd like to be like him.
Well, I would hope so. I would hope so, because I would really like to see a bunch of young blacks that were, I don't want to see these kids out on the street getting killed and killing each other and killing everybody up and down the streets, just like over here shooting right around our own neighborhood here. We've had stuff, that's just really bad in the last few days. Here we've had some things happen that were not very commendable.
Sherry, could we just pause it? You could just hold these up. I think pretty vertical. Otherwise, you could end up with glare. Just if you'll zoom in and just you can tell what each photo is.
This is just a photo of me in a P-51, the type of one that I flew in combat. P-51C was the main type of plane that the 332nd flew in combat. Eventually we got some of the D models, but they came along late in the program. And this was a picture that was taken right after I came back from a combat mission. That was with 3 of our pilots. I'm the fellow on the left, I guess if you're looking from the right, it'd be on the right. And that was a Red Cross worker. They served us donuts after each mission, and so we were getting donuts. And that was me on the far left, and next to me was Harold Sawyer. He's a fellow from Columbus, Ohio, and we flew over 100 and some combat missions together. And the other guy is Walter Foreman. And those guys are all dead now. All of my friends that I flew with are almost all dead now. This is a picture that is downtown in the museum center down in, it has a picture of me, a life-size photo of me down in the basement. And my father wanted to see that, so I took him down there one day, and while we were there, somebody came by and took a photograph of my dad, myself, and this life-size, I guess what do you call him when you cut out a photograph, a large photograph. And this is a picture of me and Herbert Halbern. He's the gentleman who I met in 1995 and found out that we had been classmates in the 3rd grade, and we became friends and traveled around the country. We went to, well, we were invited to Harvard, where we received the Harvard Foundation Medal for Intercultural Relations, because we have been going around giving talks around, mostly around the local areas, and we have been to colleges and things over Pennsylvania and Illinois and other places, giving talks on intercultural relations, and he lives right here in Cincinnati.
That's all, David.
Oh, is it?
It's over an hour. Let's stop.
And I think as long as
Okay, go ahead.
I think it can go.
And this is a picture of the Cincinnati chapter of the Tuskegee Airmen. This was about 5 years ago, and it has a lot of the people who were actually in the war, and a lot of these are people who were just interested in the chapter, and so we were opening our membership to people who were interested in telling the story of the Tuskegee Airmen and participating in our activities. So we had quite a nice little group here in Cincinnati, and this is a picture of that group.
Okay, well, Mr. Leahr, it has been a great pleasure to listen to you this afternoon. Thank you so much.
It's a pleasure to be here. Thanks for inviting me.